Hello, good morning everyone, Rajwan here, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to have a look at a new 2x macro lens from TT Artisan designed for full frame cameras. The price of this lens is only around $400 and it's not just a 2x macro lens, it's also a tilt shift lens as well. There are quite a few affordable tilt shift lenses in the market, but most of them are either tilt or shift. So this TT Artisan lens is both tilt and shift, and that makes this lens pretty unique. This lens will be initially available for the Sony E, Canon RF, Nikon Z, and also the APS-C Fujifilm X mount, but it will also be available for some other mounts in the near future. I heard the L mount is one of them. So in this review, we'll have a look at the image quality of this lens and how does it perform in real world. I'll also do some comparisons with the Laowa 100mm 2x macro lens, which is one of the most popular and the best quality 2x macro lens in the market with the same 100mm focal length. The Laowa's retail price is slightly more expensive than the TT Artisan, so we'll see if this new TT Artisan lens could be a great alternative or not for people who want a 100mm 2x macro lens, especially if you're also interested in this tilt shift feature. Before we start, the usual disclaimer, the sample I got here was sent to me by ProGear, so if you're interested in getting this lens or even just want to find out more information, you can support me and ProGear by using the link that I put in the video description below. But the contents of this review is not influenced by ProGear, so I will share with you all the good things and bad things I found about this lens as usual. Okay, first let's have a look at the lens sharpness when shooting non-macro photos, where the focus distance is a few meters away. As usual, let's have a look at the center first. At f2.8, TT Artisan's center sharpness is good, but the sharpness would improve noticeably at f4. Stopping down to f5.6 and we get the maximum center sharpness. The sharpness remains pretty much the same until f11. Stopping down the lens further and diffraction would take away a bit of sharpness. If we compare with the Laowa, at f2.8 the Laowa is slightly sharper, but once you stop down the lens to f4 or f5.6, then there is almost no difference between these two lenses. And we'll look at the corner sharpness now. At f2.8, the TT Artisan's corner sharpness is a little bit soft but still usable. The Laowa is much better. As we stop down the lens, the TT Artisan starting to catch up in terms of corner sharpness. At f8, there is not much difference between the two lenses. As usual, all the corner sharpness tests were done with the photo focus at the center. If I focus at the corner, the TT Artisan's corner sharpness would improve a bit. Now, since the TT Artisan is a shift lens, so if I shift the lens to maximum in horizontal direction, at f2.8 the extreme corner is really quite soft, especially the last 5% is quite smudgy. Once again, if I adjust the focus and focus at the corner, then the corner sharpness would improve quite a bit, apart from the last 5% that is still smudgy. As I've mentioned at the beginning, this TT Artisan lens is a 2x macro lens. When shooting at 2x magnification, the distance between the front of the lens and the subject is around 8 cm or just over 3 inches, which is quite good as your lens still has a bit of distance from your subject. Here are some photos that I shot at approximately 2x magnification. At the maximum aperture f2.8, the center sharpness is very good already. Look at this sample photo. We can see all the details is definitely very usable. Contrast is good too. But it's quite hard to nail the focus because the depth of field is so narrow when shooting at the minimum focus distance at f2.8 aperture. Even with the camera on the tripod and a static subject, even a tiny touch of the camera or my subject would completely change the focus point. Stopping down the lens to f4 does improve the sharpness slightly. With my 24 megapixel Z6, the image starting to be a bit soft from f8 onwards. Compared it to the Laowa, it seems the Laowa is slightly sharper at f2.8, but as I said, the depth of field is so narrow, so it's really hard to get the focus correct, so any difference in sharpness could be just because of user error. But at least I would say, both lenses can deliver very sharp photos at 2 times magnification, even if you are shooting at the maximum aperture. If I shoot at 1 times magnification, the working distance is now increased to approximately 12 centimeters, so getting close to 5 inches, and that is really quite good. Bokeh is very important for a lens like this TT Artisan 100mm macro tilt shift lens, as it could be used as a portrait lens and also macro lens, so a lot of time you have the background blurred, so you don't want the bokeh to be too distracting. I think the bokeh from this TT Artisan lens is very decent. I don't see much nervous highlight near the edge of the bokeh balls. The transition at the edge of the bokeh ball to the background is smooth. The bokeh balls are run even when stopped down all the way to f22, which is important for a macro lens, as very often you will stop down the lens quite a bit when shooting macro photos. So yeah, I don't really have any complaints about the bokeh of this TT Artisan lens. Because this TT Artisan is a tilt shift lens, which means the lens image circle will be quite a bit larger than the average lenses, so it usually means the vignetting performance should be really good. And my test photos confirms that. Even at f2.8, the lens has very minimal amount of vignetting, and once I stop down the lens a little bit, then vignetting virtually disappeared. If I compare with the Laowa, you can see the Laowa, which is not terrible by any means, definitely has a lot more noticeable vignetting, especially at wide open. But once I stop down the lens to f5.6, then these two lenses have very similar vignetting performance. And what about if I shift the TT Artisan lens? If I turn the focus range to the minimum focus distance and shift the lens to maximum, then there is a bit of dark or black corner there. However, this issue is only there if you are shooting at macro distance. Once I turn the focus range back a little bit from around 0.3 to 0.4 meter onwards, which is around 1 feet, the black corner would almost disappear. Since most of us would use the shift feature when the lens is at infinity focus distance for shooting landscape or architectural photos, so this should not really be a problem when using in real world. This TT Artisan lens chromatic aberration control is pretty good. I see a bit of color fringing, but the amount is very minimal and not really noticeable until I zoom in and start pixel peeping. Compared with the Laowa, the TT Artisan has slightly more chromatic aberration, but the Laowa is very famous for its almost lack of chromatic aberration, so even though the TT Artisan has a little bit more chromatic aberration than the Laowa, I think both lenses are really good in this area. 100mm prime lens usually doesn't have too much distortion, and it is definitely the case for both the TT Artisan 100mm macro tilt shift lens and the Laowa 100mm macro lens as well. Look at these two brick wall photos. There is virtually no distortion noticeable. And this is the same when I look at my real world photos as well, so you don't really have to worry about distortion at all if you want to use either of these lenses to shoot some architectural photo with long straight lines. Lens flare is usually one of the weakest area for TT Artisan. Unfortunately, it is still the same for this lens. When there is a strong light source in front of the lens, especially when the light source is just outside the frame, the lens flare would quite often cause the contrast to drop significantly and also creates a bright area in the photo. I'm guessing it is caused by some internal reflection inside the lens. Unfortunately, the lens doesn't come with a lens hood, otherwise it may help improve that a little bit. So maybe we can get an aftermarket lens hood that screw onto the lens 67mm front filter thread and see if that helps. Now, to be fair, lens flare is usually a weakness for a lot of lenses at this price point, especially the lenses from Chinese optics company. The Laowa 100mm macro lens also suffers quite a bit of lens flare issue. While the contrast doesn't drop as much as the TT Artisan when there is a bright light source just outside the frame but in front, the Laowa would have some ring-shaped lens flare when the light source is right in front of the lens, which the TT Artisan doesn't have. So each of these lenses has its own lens flare issue. For macro lens, the shape of the aperture brace are usually optimized to give us nice round bokeh even when stop down. And that means sunstars are usually not the priority, and that may suffer a bit. But surprisingly, this is not the case for this TT Artisan 100mm macro tilt shift lens. From f8, you can start to get some nice looking 12-point sunstars. And as we stop down the lens further, the sunstars become sharper and look really not bad at all at f22. To show you how nice the sunstars from the TT Artisan is, here are some comparison photos with the Laowa, both shot at the same aperture. A lot of Laowa lenses have very nice sunstars, but this is not the case for this Laowa 100mm macro lens. This TT Artisan lens is probably not a great lens for video work. I mean, it's got enough resolution and very good image quality, but if you need to pull focus, then the focus ring is really a little bit too stiff, and there's also a lot of focus breathing just like most other macro lenses. The aperture ring is also not declicked, so yeah, you can use this lens for video, but not the type that you would want to change focus or aperture during the shot. If you're thinking about the Laowa, then I would say it is more or less the same, as neither of these two lenses are really great for video work. But at least with the TT Artisan lens, you can use the tilt shift feature to create some special effects for your video. And last but not least, let's have a look at the design and construction of this TT Artisan lens. This TT Artisan 100mm macro tilt shift lens is a completely mechanical lens. There is no electronic features, no electronic contacts, so the camera wouldn't know anything about the lens. It is a manual focus lens as well, which is not unexpected for a tilt shift lens. The lens has a full metal construction and it feels super solid but also a bit heavy. The weight of the lens is around 700 grams depending on the camera mount. The Laowa 100mm 2x macro lens that we compare with this review is also not a light lens, and the Laowa weighs around 650 grams, so slightly lighter but not a huge difference. But remember, the TT Artisan is a tilt shift lens, so it has some extra mechanics for the tilt shift feature. The lens has a 67mm front filter thread, and there are 4 small screw holes at the front of the lens for you to attach a cold shoe mount bracket that comes with the lens. With that cold shoe mount bracket, you can now attach accessories like LED light to the front of the lens, so it is a pretty nice little design. I do also really like that there are 4 mounting holes, each at 90 degrees apart, so if you are using a LED light, you can choose the direction or position of the light. But there's only one cold shoe mount bracket that comes with the lens, and I would like to see more, at least 2, because then I can attach 2 LED light on the opposite side, so I can have a more balanced lighting setup from the opposite side when shooting macro photos. One interesting thing is, there is no mention of this cold shoe mount bracket in the user manual at all, at least the one that I received, and it is a small piece, so I completely missed that when I took the lens out of the box. It's not until I later on talked to TT Artisan directly, then I figured out there is a bracket and what is that for. The focus ring is quite big, and the focus throw is 90 degrees, so it's not very long. I think it could be slightly longer. The ring is also a little bit tight, but it is very smooth. The focus ring has focus distance marking on it in meter, feet, and there's also a macro magnification scale, and they're all in different colors, so it's very easy to read. TT Artisan lenses are usually more photography focused, and because of that, the aperture ring has clicks, and I love it. The clicks feels very satisfying when you turn the aperture ring. The clicks feels so much better than the Laowa 100mm macro lens, because with the Laowa lens, sometimes I don't even feel the clicks. Near the lens mount, we have the tilt, shift, and rotate controls. If you have used any tilt shift lens before, the control should be very familiar to you. There is a lock for the tilt and shift control separately, and then you can adjust the tilt and shift independently. I don't have any problem with the tilt control adjustment, but for the shift adjustment, the locking tab is really quite small and also very close to the lens mount, so it's not very easy to reach and adjust. This is especially a problem when you rotate the lens and the locking tab is right next to the camera's tripod mount, and if you mount the lens on a tripod, sometimes my finger just can't reach that tab at all. Now, this is not a unique problem for this TT Artisan lens, but because of the design of that particular tab, there is only one place that your finger has to reach to unlock or lock it, and unfortunately that tab is facing the inside, not the outside, which makes it harder to reach. So if you have big fingers, it could be a problem for you, and you may have to take the camera off the tripod to reach that tab. Another issue I have with the design is the rotation. So tilt shift lens would usually allow you to rotate the lens, so you can choose in which orientation you want to tilt or shift the lens. This TT Artisan lens doesn't allow independent tilt or shift rotation adjustment. So that means the tilt and shift direction are always perpendicular to each other, which I think is perfectly fine for a lens at this price point. But what I was a little bit surprised is that you can only rotate the lens for 90 degrees and there are 6 clicks in between. I was really expecting the lens can rotate 360 degrees or at least 180 degrees. Now you may ask why I want 180 or 360 degrees. Isn't that 90 degrees is enough? Yes, you're right. 90 degrees is enough for normal shooting, as you usually only need to tilt or shift the lens vertically or horizontally, so that will be enough. But there are times that you may want more than that. For example, if you want to use the tilt feature to create some special shadow depth of field effects, there are times that you may want to tilt the lens but not in vertical or horizontal orientation. You may want the tilt orientation to be somewhere in between to create the blur effect in some special way. With the current design, you may have to end up turn the camera around if you want to do that, because the rotation doesn't allow you to rotate the lens to the angle that you want. And this is just one of the example, and there are other use cases that a user may want to rotate the lens more than 90 degrees. But apart from this complaint, the tilt, shift, and rotate mechanism is good. The construction is very solid and precise, very similar to the tilt shift lenses that are a lot more expensive. My final thoughts for this TT Artisan 100mm macro tilt shift lens. Image quality wise, I think the only major weakness is lens flare, which I really hope TT Artisan can improve, as this is what I've been complaining in most of my TT Artisan reviews. But otherwise, overall the image quality is good. It's good enough that most people should be pretty happy with. And it being a 2x macro lens is definitely a very nice feature, as there are a lot of creative photos that you can shoot compared to a normal 1x macro lens. But the biggest thing about this lens is its tilt shift feature. Tilt shift photography is fun, a lot of fun. It wasn't that long ago that I spent almost $2,000 to buy my Nikon 45mm PCE lens because I want to use the tilt shift feature. The Nikon is a fantastic lens, but I have to save up quite a while to finally able to afford it. This TT Artisan lens is only around $400, which is a lot more affordable, especially since you can also use this lens as a 2x macro lens. For myself, I found the 100mm may be a bit too long for doing tilt shift photography. I would prefer something a little bit wider angle, so really looking forward to see if TT Artisan would bring out something like that in the future. but this is completely a personal preference. So if you need a way to convince yourself, you can think of it this way. You are spending $200 for a tilt shift lens and $200 for a 2x macro lens, which is really a good deal. I really like it when companies try to do something different and make photography more affordable and accessible. This TT Artisan 100mm 2x macro tilt shift lens is definitely one great example.